Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeannette Shambaugh, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on disability, the perspective of caregiving, and inclusion. We will be going through my nephew Christopher's journey and how him and his family have navigated all three of these areas. So let's jump right in. So here we have the table of contents. Under pre-work, we're going to go over what exactly is IPEX and what it's like living with IPEX. We're going to talk about the caregiving aspect and the caregiving and services received, as well as inclusion and the successes that he's had with inclusion, as well as successes he's had with inclusion within the community. For research, we're going to take an in-depth look at Jamie and meet Jamie and Christopher and hear their story. And under new learning, we're going to learn about the perspective of a caregiver, the perspective of the person receiving the care, services needed, and gaps that are there. Under continued inquiry, we're going to learn about how we can support better inclusion and how we can better support caregivers. So what is IPEX and what does a caregiver do to help someone that has IPEX? First, let's talk about IPEX. IPEX syndrome is a rare genetic disorder that can present early in life. There have only ever been 300 documented cases worldwide. The syndrome primarily affects males and is caused by problems with the immune system. The immune system normally protects the body from foreign invaders such as bacteria and viruses by recognizing and attacking the invaders. However, the immune system can malfunction and attack the body's own tissues and organs instead, which is known as autoimmunity. IPEX syndrome is characterized by the development of multiple autoimmune disorders in affected individuals. Although IPEX syndrome can affect many different areas of the body, autoimmune disorders involving the intestines, skin, and hormone-producing glands occur most often. IPEX syndrome can be life-threatening in early childhood. Individuals with IPEX syndrome typically develop other types of autoimmune disorders in addition to those that involve the intestines. Autoimmune blood disorders are common. About half of the affected individuals have low levels of red blood cells or certain white blood cells. Because these cells are attacked by the immune system in some individuals, IPEX syndrome involves the liver and kidneys. Sadly, outcomes for children with classic, untreated IPEX syndrome are generally poor. Most children will die within the first 2 years of life from inadequate organ function. This is where the need for services begins, and that's at birth. With a child with IPEX, having the correct medical services available to them would be the difference between life and death. As a caregiver, your role can vary depending on the child. Every child is slightly different. There are no two cases that are completely identical. So for the example of my nephew Christopher, the role my sister plays as a caregiver is she feeds him multiple times a day through his tube feeds. She cares for all of his feeding tubes, his G tube, and changing the tubes. He has a variety of medications. She provides weekly blood infusions, as well as combines all his other services that he needs as well together. For example, his IEP, his 504, his baseball accommodations. So she is the umbrella that makes sure he's always getting all his needs met every single day. So now that we have a little background of what IPEX is, we're going to dig a little deeper into the pre-work that I did for this assignment and why I chose this story to tell. But the thing I really wanted to focus on was living with a disability from birth till death, so for your entire lifetime, as well as the caregiver's perspective and inclusion. This is important to me because disability services in my life have saved my nephew's life, and I also have worked in the background of disability services in our education system. So I really wanted to focus in the successes and the things that they have done to be successful and utilize their services to make my nephew's the best life possible, even after all of the things he's dealt with. So for this slide, we're going to go over the interview I had with my sister and nephew. I interviewed them because, of course, they're very knowledgeable. They live and breathe this every single day. My background knowledge is that he's my family member. I've watched a lot of this happen. I've helped in some areas, but definitely my sister does all the hard work. Christopher was diagnosed approximately 1 month after he was born, and he continued to spend the next 6 years in the hospital. He was not expected to live very long. He had his first bone marrow transplant when he was very, very young, and a couple years later, we saw that it had completely depleted. He needed a second one. At that time, there were 0 matches worldwide that could facilitate this. So we did a bone marrow drive, and by some miracle, at the end of the drive, we had 4 perfect matches, which is pretty much impossible. So with one of those matches, we did a second bone marrow transplant, and up to today's date, it has held at 100%, which is amazing. So Christopher got to leave the hospital when he was about 7 years old. Due to all of those things in the hospital, he has some ongoing disabilities and that he needs for support. He has a J tube and a feeding bag that he has to be very careful of. His immune system is very weak. He did not start school until 2nd grade. He cannot eat solid foods very well, and he only began to even do some of these things after the 2nd transplant. He also has many food sensitivities that have to be fed through a special diet with a pump. The next topic I wanted to go over with my sister was what her role was as a caregiver. And I asked her, what role do you play as his in-home caregiver? She said, I am his nurse 24/7. You never know what's going to come up, especially with the feeding bag and tubes. His medical needs are every single day that he has to be fed through his tube at 5 a.m., 8 a.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m., 8 p.m., and 10 p.m. And then he has a drip pump that he feeds on from 11 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. She changes all of his G-tubes and all of his different variety of medical devices that he has to use. She also does bi-weekly blood infusions at home, as well as a long list of medications. The next topic I wanted to go over with him was school and the IEP, which we will go over IEPs later on in this presentation. Christopher's accommodations at school are he has a large variety of things he needs to do and services that he needs doing because he missed so many years of school at his early life. All of his IEP goals are based on where he is and what he needs support with. He has 0 physical goals in place. His medical condition requires the school provide a nurse on campus when he is there due to the J-tube, and the high school is giving him some extra help if needed. For example, more time on his tests. He is allowed to use a calculator. If he is feeling behind, he can use a one-on-one aide, but he is a very independent little boy and he does not like his aide. Just like the inclusion video, we watched how the aide made that little girl feel in the back of the classroom. It took my sister 3 years to fight for that aide to not be his shadow in the back of the classroom, so that is big progression. That one-on-one resource is really good because she isn't a shadow and he's allowed to control the amount of support he needs. He's a very driven little boy, and education has just soared since the IEP has been tailored to him. The first 2 or 3 years, it was really a struggle with what the school thought he needed versus assessing actually what he needed. They based their opinion on other things than actually what he could do. Just like this class taught us in our lesson materials, that the most important thing you can do when you are supplying any service for someone with a disability is to actually look at what they can do and find out where you can better help the areas that they cannot do, and not to assume someone can or can't do something just because of their label. Living and working and seeing this work out in real life has definitely been eye-opening and taught me a lot as becoming an upcoming teacher to never do that to my students. He was already 3 years behind in school, and then taking another 3 years to figure out the IEP wasn't helpful. Had we not had to go through that struggle, he may not even need an IEP to this day. He also has a 504 plan, which accommodates his absences if he is at the doctor because he has variety of specialists that he has to see monthly. He also has speech therapy, physical therapy, food sensitive therapies, and my sister also is the provider and caregiver to organize and transport and take care of all of that. So on a more fun topic, I wanted to ask, what does Christopher like? What does he like to do? He's been through so much. What's his hobbies? And he loves, and I mean loves, to play baseball. He is the pitcher for his team, and it's amazing to watch him on the field running around and being an active little boy. My sister said there were so many years the doctors told me to never expect this, and he is literally a walking miracle every single day. He's determined to live his life to the fullest and is an inspiration to so many of our community members. When he grows up, he originally wanted to be a pitcher, but recently he has started to become aware of the things he cannot do. He is a very smart boy, and he started to do some research and looking for ways that he could be on the field with his disabilities. So now in ninth grade, he is learning to become a photographer. His dream is to grow up and be a baseball photographer and travel with the Padres. The accommodations the team makes for him, they addressed and assessed what his needs were, and the number one need was that he can't slide onto any plates. But other than that, he plays with his baseball team on a really good league, and he's the pitcher, and they do a really, really good job. For the last question, I asked my sister if you could change one thing about services in any area, what would you change? And she said, I would change how difficult it was to get his school needs met. It took a lot of trial and error, and I was already so behind. It was hard on me because they were always changing it, and he didn't understand what was going on a lot of the time. I'm grateful for the staff at school, and we are all in a good place now, but taking the time to get there only set him back further, and I wish that service didn't take as long. So to wrap up this slide, the disability services, he has all of his medical services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, doctors, the caregiving that my sister does in home, his school IEP, his 504, and then his accommodation plan for his baseball team. Having all those services and having them all lined up are imperative to the success and happiness of his life. And he is a very happy, excited, inspired little boy and believes that he can do anything he puts his mind to. And without the great team that he's had behind him supporting him all the way, who knows where he would be today. So I advocate for services, I advocate for more awareness, and that is why I wanted to really highlight this journey and this aspect of what we learned in our classes combined with my nephew's journey. Some of the course materials that I used, Leo's story, Anything But Sorry. It was a really, really well put together video of how insensitive people can be and not even know it. This personally did happen a lot within my family, and it would have been a lot nicer if people actually understood how they could be more positive and not be so directly negative about something that they view as negative. I also really wanted to include the What is Inclusion video. It's the story of the little girl in the back of the class wondering why she can't be like everybody else. And that was really impactful to me and the story because, as I said before, he has already lived through that, and seeing somebody else live through that and how you can overcome it, I would like to bring more awareness to that. Another resource that I did was the Family Support in Persons with Disabilities Across the Life course. The perspective of a caregiver and the difficulties that they go through are just huge. There's also large gaps in the caregiving that is provided versus what is needed. A lot of caregivers, almost 60%, don't even get paid for their services, and they just are doing all of this, and they're not able to get a job, and they're not able to do these things because they have to do all these other things during the day. And it's a really good article that shows what we can do to better this, how we can go about making that gap smaller, and how we can keep awareness going. Some of the other research that I did outside of the course materials was information on disability. I went to Seattle Children's Hospital because without them and their services and the amazing services they provided to our family, who knows where we would be. They provided a home that they could live in the hospital with my nephew for all of his transplants and all of those years served, and they don't charge $1. So if you ever come across any way to help the Children's Hospital, I would encourage you to do so. I also included a link to what is IPEX if you wanted to dive deeper into the medical technical terms and all the other in-depth details about what is IPEX. And I also wanted to include IEPs and inclusion. It's a Center for Parent Information and Resources, and it will give you a good overview of what an IEP is, what services are provided, and the process of getting one, and how to get the most out of your child's IEP. So for the next two slides is the evidence. It is the interview. If you'd like to read every question and the answers in depth, on the next page you will find the interview in its entirety. Here is the interview in its entirety. If you zoom in, you'll be able to read all of the questions and the answers at length. Feel free to do so. There's some really great information and tidbits in there about my family. In this next section, New Learning, we're going to go over some of the course materials that help me learn more about my topic of disability inclusion, as well as some of the videos. What is inclusion, and what is the best inclusion we can provide possible? And through the course materials, as well as this video that I'm including a link to, I learned that to provide the best possible inclusion in the classroom, it is not one size fits all. There is not one cookie cutter for every single student depending on their needs. Every single student is unique and special and has things they excel at and things they don't excel at, and no two students are the same ever. So when we're looking at inclusion, we need to look at the whole picture, look at it from a bigger scope, not just the diagnosis or what a piece of paper says. We really need to look at the person. We also need to approach this with an open mind and have no bias. You know, when we think of a disability, we automatically assume what someone can and can't do. And again, I've said that a couple times, but it's so important to evaluate the human and not their disability. So I'm including on my New Learning, what is an IEP and the evidence of an IEP. An IEP is an individualized education program. It supports students' needs as well as the support they need to get their best education possible. It also provides accommodations for students and provides equal access to all students and their education. So if your student, for example, needs more, they have anxiety and they needed more time to get a test done, the IEP would protect your student and allow that to happen. You would get your child evaluated depending on their disability or need, and from there you and the school would come up with a plan that best supports your child. They are individualized education plans. So each IEP is very unique to the student and their needs and how they're going to meet those needs, their goals. They'll break it down into smaller goals and subcategories, and it's a really important tool for students who need them. That way they are getting equitable education and access to everything that every other student has access to as well. So on this tab, I included family support of persons with disabilities across the life course. I've included a link as well, but there is not equitable access for all caregivers and their families. Caregivers across the life course and the impacts that it can have on your family dynamics as well. How policy and laws are changing to create equitable access for everybody. There is a very large gap. There are approximately 43.5 million informal caregivers that are not receiving any compensation for the caregiving they are giving in their home, and 60% of them are women. These efforts that we need to make sure everyone is getting the services that they need for their children, especially mothers who can't necessarily go and work because they're at home giving all of these needs to their child. You can't have a full-time job if you have to do, say, feeding 6 times a day, or be available to change a feeding tube or a bag in case it fell out and your kid could possibly lose their life over that. We need to get our efforts together and help identify the support needs of caregiving families, influence program development, and resource allocation. We also need to shape social health as well as family policy. This is a really good read. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend checking it out. And finally, we have continued inquiry. My biggest takeaway and my biggest idea from doing this whole entire applied assignment is how can we create equitable access that's appropriate for everyone? Since there is no one size fits all, there is no one number that fits all, how can we come together and make the access that everybody that has a disability be equitable and accessible for their disability? Now that I know that I want to know how we can provide more equitable access for all, some of the things that I'm going to do to continue to learn and grow and hopefully help somebody else is give myself more exposure to people and situations, apply myself to be an advocate in any way possible. If I see something, say something. If I see a way that I could possibly have good input or be of service to someone, to allow myself that, and most importantly, education. Without education of what we need and we don't assess what we need, how will we ever know what we need to fix or how we need to fix it? So education with advocacy and community outreach go hand in hand. And if you can educate the community around you, I believe that that empathy will grow naturally. And having that true empathy will help people actually want to help instead of just looking away or thinking, I can't do anything. There's too much here to do. Just like, with Gary Evans and the starfish theory. If we all pick up one starfish at a time, we are making a difference. So those are the ways that I'm going to learn to grow more and try to help advocate and be there and provide anybody with any type of help that they may need to get access to certain services. Questions for my peers. So my question is very simple, but it's actually really complex. My question is, what are the ways that you guys think we can provide equal access for all individuals? And I'm asking on any scope. How do you think we can provide equal access in our communities better? How do you think we can provide equal access in our classrooms better? How do you think we can provide equal access to our caregivers, making sure they don't burn out and they have the support that they need to support their children? How can we also provide that access to medical services? There's a lot of people that don't get medically taken care of because they simply don't have access. So that's my question for you. What creative ways do you think that we can do as a society to come up with and provide equal access for all individuals? Thank you all so much for watching my presentation. I hope that you got a lot out of it. I want to give a special thank you to my sister and my nephew for letting me into their lives and sharing their very personal story with all of you. And I hope it gave you some insight to what a family that deals with a disability goes through on a day-to-day basis.